Welcome to Indigenous Languages Action Forum Conversations. My name is Siki, Dlanga. We promote the use and development of Indigenous languages. Enjoy today's conversations. Good afternoon. Welcome to Indigenous Languages Action Forum Conversations. This is Siki Dlanga, and today we are going to be discussing the BA program that is celebrating 20 years since it was started. And here we have Esther and Michael, who started this program, and the former student Abram, who is a living proof of this successful program, that you can start something new that hasn't been done before. And this was a multilingual course. But I would like to start by asking Michael and Esther about this first, and ask, what made you start this program, this BA course?
Thank you so much, Siki. The actual program is called BA in Contemporary English and Multilingual Studies, and it is often referred to as BA SEMS. So BA SEMS is unique in that it is the first, and as far as we know, the only program in which two languages are used on par with each other. So this is a bilingual degree.
And what would those languages be?
Sorry?
Is it English and Sepedi?
No, it's a bilingual degree in which an African language, Sepedi, which you might know is a dominant language in the Limpopo province, is used as a medium of instruction and assessment, along with English. So the program is made up of two strands. It's a 3-year full-fledged BA degree. And in those 3 years, students do half of the degree in Sepedi, their mother tongue, and the other half in English. So it's the only degree in which both the languages, one a highly developed language, English, and another language which is not yet been used in universities as a medium of instruction, are brought together in a bi-academic literacy program. So maybe Michael can say a bit about what was the thinking at that time?
Yeah,
yes,
what made you do it?
We know about the language and education policy in 1997, which actually advocated that there should be a bilingual biliteracy program as a policy in the country. But in addition to that was the fact that we observed that students who come into the university actually retain the African languages for academic purposes. How? One is they use it as they have to do African language as a subject. I'm sure Abraham will be able to testify this because he's been through that school education. So they learn African language as a subject, and they are actually reading and producing texts in the African language. It means full-blown use of the African language. And the second thing is we noticed, and that has been widely accepted by applied linguists, that the phenomenon of code switching that students are forced to use because they can't manage to comprehend texts in English, they have to use their home language, which is now actually affirmed by what is called translanguaging, which is another name for code switching and code mixing. So this phenomenon made us feel that African languages are not lost to the students when they come to the university. There was a lot of doubt about how can students actually learn through an African language. But this was our reasoning. And we found that students were, even in the university, even now, still using the African languages. May not be for writing and reading of text, but they are using it in the classroom. But anyway, that was our reasoning, that we should prevent the further loss of African languages by having a bilingual program.
So
yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
So, you know, having started the program, you obviously didn't have material, I imagine.
Mm,
How did
yeah.
you how did you start the program without material? And especially because indigenous languages were not used in that level of education in higher learning in that subject as well.
So that is a question that's often been asked to us. How do you teach without material?
Yes.
So if you look at pedagogy or classroom pedagogy, there are actually three aspects to it. There's materials, there's interaction, which happens around the materials, and then there is assessment. So in the early stages of the degree, which is in 2003, we are actually celebrating 20 years of this program. We started off by just getting a very few texts, actually key quotations translated into Sepedi from applied linguistics texts. But we believed that even if the text is in English, teachers can interact with that text in their own language, mediate that text in their own language. Students can talk to each other in their own language, and they can write in their own language. So the materials part of this three-part aspect of curriculum was the one that took time to develop, but over a period of time, a number of key texts in applied linguistics, especially multilingual education, were translated and made available to the students. Further, the texts that students themselves produce are examples of academic writing in their mother tongue. And these have been used in further cohorts of students. But over the last 20 years, many more materials have been translated, and the lecturers who are now on the program have themselves written academic texts which are available in their own language. But given now, like 20 years ago, we didn't have the digital resources we have now. And nowadays, translation through machine translation, and we have a very big South African translation service. They are able to provide these kind of texts. But the sad thing is that most universities are not using African language texts to develop academic literacy in the home language.
Siki, if I may, a question to Esther, something that hasn't come out clearly yet. How did you use the English and the Sepedi? Did you mix? Did you use both in one class, or did you have a couple of courses in the one language and then you switch over to the other? How did you do it exactly?
Okay, so we believe that if an African language like Sepedi has to be developed in a full-fledged way as a language of academic literacy, then it can't be just bits and pieces of Sepedi just mixed up with English. So what we did was we divided the whole syllabus, 12 modules, into 6 modules which are taught entirely in Sepedi, and 6 modules which are taught entirely in English. And these 2 modules were not a repetition in terms of content. So we taught different subjects in the BA, in the SEMS contemporary English modules. There were 6 of them. And then in the multilingual studies modules, everything was done in Sepedi. But what we have to say is that even in the English classes, students were freely permitted, I mean, it was unstoppable, to use their own language to interpret English texts. And but the teachers always used the standard Sepedi language as they would in an English class. And we were fortunate to have 3 or 4 really good Sepedi teachers, some of them drawn from the PanSalb translation unit at the University of Limpopo, who carried out these classes. So it's extremely important to give Sepedi its own status as a language which is a medium of instruction, not just, mix and match a little bit here and there, no, but as a full-fledged medium of instruction in which the course outlines were produced, Sepedi, the materials of course, progressed were also in Sepedi. The classroom interaction was in Sepedi, and they wrote exams, assignments, made PowerPoint presentations, did research projects, which they presented all in Sepedi. So for us at that level, English and Sepedi were treated as being on par, even though it was an asymmetrical relationship in education as a whole.
Very interesting.
Does that explain?
Thank you, Conrad. That really was a really helpful question to highlight the use of Sepedi and how the actual course worked. But I'd like to ask Abram, what year do you start, and what was your experience? Because and what made you pick that particular course and that route? Could you please unmute yourself?
Thank you, Siki. Yeah, I mean, like, I remember coming to the university, you were overwhelmed by the amount of options available, and to many of us going to the university were pretty much unsure about, what exactly you want to do. You're thrown into the deep end. And I remember going to the principal admin officer, and they said that we do have a space in this unique program called VSS, and I did enroll, and clueless about the program, and I did found out in the actual, I mean, what do they call it, orientation, and here you know, Esther and Michael come through, and I remember one of the study lecturer, Mampako Mudiva, and they came in through, and they, you know, it just sounds something that was not possible to do. It just sounded unique. It sounded overwhelming. But the conversation around there is strong base for using the language that students come with into the academic context, and those reasons have been, you know, validated by research coming out that you know, when you use the languages that students bring with into the academic context, you are reaffirming their identity, that it's a strong and reliable tool for knowledge development and for epistemic access, which is, you know, forms part of the entire academic project. It lies with access to knowledge, and that turned out to be true. That the home language is a powerful resource for accessing academic discourse, for accessing academic content, and for accessing scientific knowledge, which sort of, you know, it opens opportunities for more engagement in classroom. And that was essentially my experiences, you know, throughout the BSM's program.
May I come in here, Siki?
Of course, yes.
You see, a lot of people say, you know, but why do we want to have a whole strand of a whole degree in an African language? What we found is that when we look at the matric results of students, their mark in English is 40, 45, 50, what they call the people's mark. But when you look at their mark for their metric Sepedi, it's 70, 75. And you can see immediately that their strength lies in the knowledge they have of their home language. So why not build on that rather than keep them back by continuing with English? And we know the dropout rates at university, only 40% of students graduate at the end. And so we thought using their own language is a very powerful resource, as Abram's pointed out. And students suddenly feel very much at home in the classroom because they're using a language that they know well, and they're developing that language through engagement with new knowledge. It's not just language, grammar, etc., but they're learning new concepts, new ideas through their language.
What I really love about this is that it seems to emphasize the thing that in order to, just the fact that you're learning English doesn't mean that you have to become English.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
That's why, Conrad, we used to use the term that African students must appropriate English for their own advantage, instead of getting assimilated into the main English culture. That's it.
We say something along the lines of master English through your own language.
Yes, exactly.
Brilliant.
Through your mother tongue.
And so what you're saying actually, Conrad, is that what we found is the tremendous transfer that takes place from English to, from Sepedi to English. So once the student knows how to write a research report in Sepedi, they know the structure of it, what they have to put in the problem statement, in the introduction, the methodology section, etc. They can easily transfer that to a research problem that they're investigating in English. So you don't have to teach the same skills twice. And there's powerful research evidence to show that this transfer does take place, because the linguistic system in the mind is made up of many different aspects, and you don't have to treat them separately.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Abram. I hope you don't mind my asking all the questions.
No, please,
Siki.
please.
I wanted to ask Abram, how did he fit both languages into his head? How did you cope with that?
Yeah. Well, I think because the program is highly structured in the sense that in the multilingual studies program, everyone knows that the content is in Sepedi and assessment in Sepedi. In the SALS, English in contemporary English language studies, it's highly structured that the content is in English, even assessments are in English. But as Esther said, that there's no, there are no lines on the sand. Even in the English stream, there was, consensus that it's okay to discuss concepts or academic texts. For example, in a group discussion, pair discussion, you're able to pick up ideas from your neighbor to discuss the sort of a tool of negotiating access to those deep scholarly texts, which may, generally be difficult, and that sort of helped us to access that academic context. But the amazing thing is, the fact that half of your content is in English and half of your content is in Sepedi does not diminish or weaken your proficiency in English. And many people are sort of overwhelmed that you're highly proficient in English, while in undergrad studies half of your content was in English. That sort of demystify that even though half of your content or your course is in one language and in another, it diminishes your proficiency in one or the other. I can write and read in both languages, and that's the advantage and the positive thing out of the program.
Yeah, I found with English that I always have some words slipping out again.
Yeah. Because one of the things that usually happen also in academic, once students leave high school and they have to learn a new language in some sense, because the academic language, even if you were an English-speaking student, it's a completely different language, and you need to learn new vocabulary, new way of communicating that's different to how people speak. So how did you deal with that, where now you have you basically have to have academic language in Sepedi and academic language in English? Did it work easier because you're doing it in two different languages, which is your home language and your indigenous language? Or English. Because I did not study my indigenous language to that level because I didn't have access to it. But I did notice that if I was receiving maybe an exam question in English and Afrikaans, sometimes if I needed to understand the English word that was a difficult word for me to understand, I would read Afrikaans because of the descriptive nature of Afrikaans. So, did you feel that when you were studying Isipedi, or you had to write your research paper in Isipedi and you writing it in English, that it strengthened your ability to express yourself or even to understand the concepts, because you kind of like have to understand them in two different languages, which is your own home language or indigenous and, you know, English, which then maybe gives you an upper hand in some ways of understanding the concepts even more. Abram.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because even when you use Sepedi in academic context, you know, you still need a highly academic discourse of Sepedi, which is not natural. We'll come across an academic text in the field of multilingual studies. You look at the text and say, but is this Sepedi that we use at home? Because there's a huge difference. It's highly scholarly, and the convention of the text, which are highly academic. But the same applies to English. You look at an academic text, like you're literally scrubbing your head, you're trying to make sense of what is this person trying to say through this text. So the exciting thing about my experience in the DSMs was, our lecturers were very intentional that about, say for example, in a classroom, we were able to use the oral, conversational Sepedi as a tool of mediating those deep academic texts, that would include having conversation in peers among us and even with the lecturer, as a tool of saying that of negotiating access to those scholarly texts. And even in English, we were permitted to use Sepedi as a resource of negotiating meanings of complex scholarly texts. And I agree that academic discourse is not natural. Everyone has to learn academic discourse, irrespective of, you're doing academic discourse in Afrikaans, academic discourse of English, academic discourse of Sepedi. You need to be intentional about socializing students into academic discourse, irrespective of the language. Yeah.
The many questions come to mind. Sorry, Siki.
No.
Over to you.
No.
There are many questions. There are many questions that come to mind while you speak, and I'm just struck by how some universities who say, and I don't want to point at any specific university now, that declare themselves multilingual, actually only use the mother tongue in the first year. So they'll provide students with support in their mother tongues, but only for the first year. The expectation then clearly is that there has to be a shift over into English only. And this program seems to be doing things completely different. Is there any other university in the country that has run courses like this?
Good question. We have found, we don't know enough, Conrad, about KwaZulu-Natal, where they made African languages compulsory for all students. So that is a progress, but as a subject only, not as a medium. But we don't know enough. They haven't published the results for us to confidently say there is another program. We wish it is the case. But we have found at Rhodes University, in one department, that is the Department of International Relations and Political Science, the head of that department, Sipokazi, has actually initiated a small experiment where the students have to produce very complex assignments and tests in their mother tongue, which is isiXhosa. And she allows the students to do it on a voluntary basis. So fewer students take up the option of writing in their mother tongue, and they are assessed in their mother tongue. And she has presented this as recently as last year, and that is work in progress. The only thing is that it is voluntary, whereas SEMS has been a full-fledged course which is compulsory in the sense that students who join it have to write in their mother tongue. And if they don't like that course, they don't register, they don't join. And the second thing is it's a whole degree. Whereas what Sipakazi is doing is part of a module, I think. So the expansion of SEMS, which we hoped would happen, hasn't happened as much as we like to. But we cite Sipakazi as the only example where an African language is used for full-blown use in assessment. And they do also read texts in their mother tongue.
And she teaches politics, right?
Yes.
I just wanted to highlight
it's very interesting that
subject, you know, it's very important.
It's very exciting to have somebody outside the language disciplines, like sociolinguistics, applied linguistics, sociology, etc., doing something like this in a mainstream department. But it, as Michael said, it's voluntary, and on maybe 3 or 4 students a year volunteer to write. People are not confident about using their own language. But if we said, you have to use it, then they will create the motivation and the understanding to do that. But there's also, I think at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the B.Ed students who have to teach in their mother tongue in the first 3 years of schooling are allowed to write their assignments in their mother tongue. But we don't know if any lecturer actually uses the mother tongue to teach psychology of education, sociology of education, Vygotskian ideas, etc. The University of Fort Hare has a B.Ed degree, which Brian Ramadiro runs. And in that program, also there are a few strands. But what we are, quite disappointed about, especially now when the climate is so positive towards multilingualism. At the time we started the degree, which was 2003, 20 years ago, there was so much hostility to this program. People were, actually asking questions, why do students need to learn in their home language? No, they need English. But now, even in this positive climate, people are not pushing the indigenous languages far enough. As Conrad said, in the first year, it's seen like a kind of bridging thing, but very quickly there's a transition to full-fledged English. We also have a commitment to what Neville Alexander called the intellectualization of African languages. And I think universities have to play a key role in the intellectualization of those languages which have been marginalized. I mean, these are majority languages, but they are minoritized by our policies. But now we have an opportunity where, models like BSMs can be tried out because the climate is ripe and ready. The policy is there. But people are just staying with translanguaging, little bits and uses of that language, interpreting and translating. And none of that leads to raising the status of an African language in the way in which it would be if we had scholarship, texts, academic texts. Neville Alexander used to say, instead of all these theses, MA theses that lie in the libraries, a requirement can be you will get your MA if you translate a key text in your own discipline, whether it's politics or psychology or economics, if you translate it into an African language. And what a creative idea that is, to just, make an abundance of academic resources in African languages available for students.
Yes, and one of the things that were, people often say is that when people write in their indigenous languages, submit to journals, the criticism was that there are no reviewers, who can review for that. And but that's another subject entirely, because your program, clearly was a success because you've done it for it's 20 years old. You're celebrating 20 years. So what would you say has sustained it, given the fact that you said that you didn't feel a lot of support? How did you manage to sustain it so that it continues for 20 years without support?
Very good question. I think we have to really basically thank the Ford Foundation, which, you know, it was an accidental meeting when Ahmed Bawa, who is the funding manager for the Ford Foundation, came to the University of Limpopo to support some academic development programs. He happened to come to our office and we talked about this program. He saw the posters, you know, announcing this new degree. The posters were also bilingual. And he said, why have you not applied for any funding for this? If you want to research this program, we can fund it. I said, we can't do research if we don't have a program in place. So first we need money for development. And if you give us that, then we will be able to research the program once it is established. So we were very lucky through a chance meeting to get that funding of over 1 million. And that gave us enough of monetary resources to employ good Sepedi lecturers, retrain them in the cognitive challenging ways in which Sepedi can be used, and to produce some of the materials. But the people we have to thank the most are really our students. Because when they discovered that our students were being, you know, potential students were being told, no, that degree, why do you want to learn in your own language? Our students who were already on the program said, we will handle the orientation and registration and curriculum counseling sessions. So they were there talking to the novice matric students, saying, you know, why they should do the program. So the students, I mean, we started with 38 students. By the end of 2020, there were 358 enrollments. So that statistic shows that the students vote with their feet. You know, when they know something is successful, they want to come there. And they keep asking, why don't we have this program in English and Chitsonga, English and Venda, which are the other 2 languages of the province? But then the people who are teaching those languages in the African language must take it up and, you know, ask for that to happen. I mean, we've shown the way. So the support, actually the tremendous support for the degree from the students themselves. And we also need to say about the success of the students. Maybe you could ask Abram about that if there's time.
But can I just quickly jump in, Siki, to answer your question? We did find African staff, professors, both within the university and other universities, who were willing to do the review and external assessment. But as you know, that assessment is both external and internal. So the internal was never a problem because we had Mampago, for instance, our first African language staff, who's now a researcher in Parliament in Cape Town. But we did find, and there are still in South Africa, a lot of African staff, African-speaking staff, who can do this review and external evaluation. So that has not been our main problem, really.
And just to add to that quickly, is that we've seen that the demography of the academic staff is changing, right? That's one thing that has been successful as more and more Black graduates come out and they get employed. I mean, still nowhere where it should be for a country with 80% African language speakers. But we do have a promising trend of employment of African scholars. And that's a great thing. And they're bringing a new perspective into higher education on Africanization, decolonization, etc. So the trend is going to grow. So I think that in a few years, we would have a body of academic scholars who can review journals, who can start journals in their own language and review those papers. But I'm very keen to hear from Abram what's happened with the students, our graduates, where are they, what are they doing?
Yes, and I'd also like to know where Abram, like what your experience was going forward after you graduated, and what the program means for you now that it's 20 years. Do you see a future for it? Where are you in this, and what was your experience? Post graduation.
I think perhaps I want to speak up from the kind of patterns we're seeing as far as graduates are concerned. You know, there's a wave of students who, for example, would want to do maybe PGC and go into teaching, and there's huge amount of students who are graduates of the program. And I think part of that is how the program is rooted into language and literacy development. So they feel empowered to go into the field to be actual teachers. So that's an interesting pattern. But we also see more and more young people, taking the research route, doing postgraduate, and quite a lot of them are in a UNISA, UJ, and other universities, and are employed as academics. And what that means is that they are carrying forward this multilingual consciousness into the academy, and that's transformative. It means impact that we have students.
I love that multilingual consciousness. That's it. That's a thing there. Multilingual consciousness.
Siki, a quick interruption from me that can easily be cut out. I think we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but this is the first in a series of talks.
Yes.
Leading up.
All right. But I'd still like Abram to land it for us. Just to say where. Yeah, just to contextualize that the student and the future, and within the context of this 20 years and the future.
I think there's even something more exciting for me. We see more young people going to teach abroad. Students are taking in Saudi Arabia, in South Korea to teach English. And what does that mean? It means that we are not just a small circle. We are part of the global village. It means that education is now becoming more and more globalized. And the fact that BSM is part of this, global, is contributing to production of global skills, that students are feeling empowered to go and teach, in South Korea, in China. It bothers well. It's something positive for me. And yeah, so those are things that that I feel are important, in the sense that we are seeing young people who have come through the program carrying forward this multilingual consciousness in the research they do, in the way they teach, in policy. We have young people who are interns in Pan South this year, 2 of them. So and that can only mean that we are replicating the impact in different spaces. We have young graduates in literature, graduates in academic spaces, young graduates in teaching, young graduates teaching abroad, and that kind of the multiplying effect of the program, and that can only be positive for the future.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful conversation. I'll maybe invite you on the next one, because this is going to be a series. Because the idea is to celebrate this success of this program, which is 20 years. And we do live in a multilingual country and a multilingual world, in fact. So this is really relevant, and there's so many lessons, and I'm sure even other countries can learn from this, not just our country, because we are living in a multilingual world. Thank you very much for joining the Indigenous Languages Action Forum conversations. We'll see you next time.